You don't need a 3090 or a Ryzen 9 5900X to stream in good quality. And I'm going to tell you how. Okay, so full disclosure, I've only been streaming for about 8 months on Twitch, but I have been stretching my performance out of lesser than components and computers for about 15 years. And so I've got a few tips that will help you make your stream look a lot better without top quality equipment. First up is to run OBS as an administrator. What this does is it tells Windows that your stream is priority over everything else. So any game you're playing will stutter for you, but your stream will look the best it possibly can, and nobody will see any quality drops on that end. If you are streaming on OBS and you are having problems, this is the first thing I'll always recommend. Run OBS as an administrator. Disable the OBS Preview window. So this one will save you just a hair of performance, but anything helps. And you don't need to see yourself in OBS, assuming you have a secondary monitor so that you can see how your stream looks. Once you have it set properly, you can right-click that window and click Disable Preview, and that'll blank out. That saves you performance. If you have a Stream Deck, you can set that to a button so that you can just toggle it on and off, or you can set a toggle in your keyboard under hotkeys in OBS. Highly recommended, no reason to have it on, and it'll save you performance. Match your output resolution to your stream. So if you are streaming in 1080p, you're going to want to match that output resolution to Twitch or YouTube. And if you're streaming in 720, same thing. But I'm going to show you specifically how to do that in OBS because there are settings that can be confusing there and you could be costing yourself performance on your GPU. So right here under output, do not check rescale output. Now I stream in 1080p and I'm currently recording in OBS. So it's set to 1080p and I do not check that block. That would force the GPU to re-encode on top of the encoding it's already doing. But under the video settings here, the base canvas resolution, if you're on 1080p for your desktop, if you're on 4K, that's what's going to show there. Your output scaled resolution, if you want to stream in 720p, this is where you would change that, and this is where you would choose the filter. What they recommend if you are on NVENC encoding, which is, I'll talk about in a minute, but that's on the GTX 1650 and higher. I'm assuming you're not on a 3000 series if you're watching this video. The downscale filter, you want to use Lanczos and 36 samples. This is also where you're going to set your FPS, and we'll talk more about FPS in a minute as well. But this is the FPS of the stream that you're outputting. So if you're streaming in 1080p 60, ideally your desktop would be 1080p already. So then you're going to leave everything the same and you would output in 60 so that you don't do any extra work or leave any performance on the table with your GPU. NVENC encoding. So this is assuming that you're using an NVIDIA GPU, a 1650 Super or later. You have a dedicated part of the GPU that is specifically designed for encoding. And if you're not using it, it's literally just sitting there doing nothing. Do not use CPU encoding if you are on an NVIDIA GPU. So you go into OBS settings right here and under streaming, also the recording tab. Now, granted, I'm using OBS to record this right now, so I can't change it, but NVIDIA NVENC H264 new, and that will select the processor that's specifically designed for encoding. NVIDIA has added it to their cards. It's best for single PC setups, and it will save you performance that you're wasting on your CPU. Limit your FPS on your GPU to a multiple of your streaming frames per second. Now, this is assuming again that you have an NVIDIA graphics card. I know that there's a way to do this on AMD, but I don't have one, so I can't show you how to do that now. But if you go to the NVIDIA control panel, under Manage 3D Settings, right here, max frame rate, I have mine set to 120 frames per second. Now, I am on a 165 Hertz gaming monitor, and because I'm on a 2060 Super, I'm not pulling 165 frames per second on a lot of games that I play, but I will sit around the 120. but I don't want to go above 120, and I can hard lock it here in this software so that no game, I can leave it on max for every single game and I don't have to change it individually, and they will never go above 120. Why 120? Because I stream at 60 frames per second. Now that consistency and allowing your GPU to split every other frame that it sends to the encoder maximizes its efficiency and eliminates a lot of the stutter that you'll see if it's grabbing inconsistent amounts of frames as it's encoding. And that's going to be most helpful for you if you use a multiple of what you're outputting to your streaming service. If you're streaming at 60 frames per second, you're probably not going to want to go above 180 unless your graphics card can handle another multiple on top of that. If you're streaming at 30, you can lock it at 60. If you're on a 60 hertz monitor, you're not seeing that anyway. So why have your graphics card work harder than it has to? It already has to do the work to encode. It makes it a lot easier and it runs things a lot smoother if you do it in multiples of what you're outputting for your stream. Use game capture in OBS, vice using window capture or display capture. OBS wasn't always very good at this, and it used to be that game capture wouldn't always capture everything. Now the most efficient way to capture the game that you're playing with your camera on top of it is to use game capture, and I can show you how to set that up really quickly. So when you're going to add a source, and see I have my preview disabled. When you go to add a source, you hit plus down here and then hit game capture, vice hitting display capture, window capture. You can create new, name it whatever you like, and then capture any full screen application is what it's going to default to. This will capture 99% of the games you're going to play. As soon as it goes full screen, it's going to grab it. Now, if you don't want to play full screen, or there are games that you have that won't play full screen for whatever reason, small indie developers, stuff like that, capture specific window, and then you will literally have to pick which window it is and then save it. When you do that, make sure that you're creating a new one specifically for that game and for that window. Otherwise, you're going to have to switch the window every time you use game capture with window capture selected. Then also in your options here, I would leave most of these on default with the exception of capture third-party overlays such as Steam. If you want your Steam overlay, when you shift tab, if you're playing a Steam game and your chat shows up, if you want your stream to be able to see that, you check that block and it'll capture it. Otherwise, just leave it off. The next one is minimizing live processing, like things like blur, video processing on your stream. So there's something really interesting that OBS can do here, like adding a mask like a blur. So I can do this live, and you see that show up on the effects there, and then it also shows up on my camera. But that actually takes a lot of GPU work for it to do that. Now, if you want a blurring effect to a shadow or something behind you while on stream, this is not the best way to do it if you're trying to squeeze every bit of performance out of your GPU that you can. I have a way to do it that looks just as good and saves you quite a bit of performance. So you can't see it very well until I add a white background to it, but look here around my camera border, see how I have this shadow behind me, and that is actually transparent. So it shows like it's blurring what's behind me, but it's not doing that processing live. Now, the way I do that is something very simple. All I did was take a black square in 1920 by 1080 and then use Photoshop, but you can use any photo editor you have, to add a Gaussian blur to the entire edge of the square and then shrink that down behind my camera. And it offloads the processing. The blur is always there because it's not changing and it's not live. It has the same effect and I'm not wasting performance. Next up is embedded scenes. So this one's not going to save you a ton of performance. It's more of a convenience factor, and then it might save you a little bit of memory. But what you're going to want to do, especially for your webcam, is put a scene within a scene. So what I've done here is all of my webcam, every time I have a scene that has my webcam in it, it's simply another scene that has nothing but the webcam source in it. So now anytime I want to change things on my webcam, it changes them across all of them. So all you need is a dedicated scene, just call it webcam scene, and then every time you're going to add the webcam scene into a different scene, you literally just add scene, and then you have webcam scene. This is how I do my shadow as well, but again, that is so that I can make changes to it, and it changes across everything. It makes things a lot easier, and that allows you to do neat effects like if you have something linked to your channel points rewards or something like that, it'll play over all of them and you don't have to add that source for every single scene that you have. The next one is to unload OBS Media when not showing. So this is useful for images, for video, anything you have on any of your backgrounds of any of your scenes. If the scene is not live, then OBS will not hold that in memory, and this will save you some performance. So I'll show you that right here. So I've added a blank white background just as an example. And if you double click there, when you open the image file, wherever you select that's going to be, this check block right here for images, and it'll be there for videos as well. Almost anything you can add to any of your scenes. Unload image when not showing. That is the easiest thing to check, and it just basically will drop it out. So when you load the scene up, it'll pull the image from memory, and then when you close the scene or you move to another scene, it'll drop it out and it's gone. And so you're not just leaving performance on the table once again. The next one is maxing out your airflow on your fan. So assuming you're air cooled and either your desktop is underneath your desk or you have a microphone that's good enough at canceling the noise out, there's no reason not to max out your fans. Maximize your cooling while you're streaming or recording specifically, and you will get better performance because you keep your core temps lower, everything will work better. So I have an Asus motherboard, so I have it set to full speed, and I also have specific profiles for streaming and recording that have it almost to full speed because my desktop is on top of my desk and it's pretty close to my microphone, and I don't want that background noise there. And finally, browser sources for your alerts. So whatever alert service you're using, Streamlabs or Stream Elements are the most common. I use Streamlabs. You want to add those as a browser source and not as local files. OBS gives you the option to load it as a local file, but then every time you get an alert on your stream, it loads directly from your computer, has to encode, and then be sent to the stream. So the easiest way to do this is to, when you add an alert, add it as a browser source and do not check the local file box. If you check that, it's going to load it directly from your computer and then it has to encode and be sent to the stream. Instead, when you use Streamlabs, for instance, which is what I use, it will generate a browser URL that you would then paste in here. And you also want to check shutdown source when not visible so that it's not eating up unnecessary bandwidth. All right, so that's everything I have. I really hope I could help. And if I've missed anything or you found any tips of your own, feel free to share them in the comments below. Or better yet, come talk about them in my Twitch stream. I stream almost every Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday night on Twitch. Link in the video description. Thanks, and good luck on your stream.